Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. 11 jurors found Bradley Barton guilty of manslaughter in the death of Cindy Gladue. That verdict came in shortly after the newscast last Friday night. APTN's Chris Stewart has reactions to that decision.
It only took a day of deliberations before the jury found 52-year-old Bradley Barton guilty of manslaughter. Barton could face up to life in prison for his role in Cindy Gladue's death in 2011. The defense and prosecution spoke outside the courthouse.
To prove lack of consent means to prove that the victim in her own mind didn't want that to happen, and I mean, we didn't have a victim here to tell us that.
Barton's lawyer, Dino Batos, said there was much sentiment towards retrying after his 2015 acquittal of first-degree murder.
The weight of the nation and the judgment of the nation was that they wanted this overturned. So disappointed, not surprised.
This morning, the former chief commissioner of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, Marian Buller, released a statement saying, in part, "The jurors who found Mr. Barton guilty show that Canadians are ready for change. So far, Canadian governments have failed to recognize the readiness for change. We are waiting still for them to build new, decolonizing relationships with Indigenous people. It is only with new relationships that Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people will be safe in their own homes and communities." Lisa Weber is a lawyer and the president for the Institute for the Advancement of Aboriginal Women. She's the pro bono advisor for Donna McLeod, Cindy Gladue's mother.
Family absolutely relieved to hear that there was a conviction. There's, again, probably no words I can express. They were, everybody was crying for joy, relief that was the actual decision. I tell you, there's a recognition right up until that very last minute that you just never know.
Weber says she has concerns about the possibility of yet a third trial.
I can say just my own reaction, both as a lawyer, female lawyer, as an Indigenous woman. It was pretty devastating and shocking to hear that Barton was already contemplating an appeal. There's no words for how much trauma that this family and frankly Indigenous everywhere have gone through as a result of this man's actions.
There was no scheduled date for Barton's sentencing. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
To northern British Columbia, the Lheidli T'enneh Nation, the McLeod Lake Indian Band, and the Formula Capital Corporation announced a plan to build a natural gas processing facility. According to a news release, the facility will be built at a proposed industrial park located 40 kilometers north of Prince George. The three parties say they are committed to finalizing the project and making sure that it remains locally driven. Here's Lheidli T'enneh Chief Clayton Pootney.
Very progressive, so is McLeod Lake. So we're always looking for the best interest, obviously, of our territories, and that does mean it's very inclusive of everybody within them as well, especially for our members. So we're trying to create these opportunities for our regions to just prosper.
We want to hear what you think about this First Nations-led natural gas project. You can share your thoughts with us. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us, of course, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and now even on TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see all of our latest stories. A year-long investigation has found First Nations water operators who treat water to make sure it's safe to drink are often overworked and underpaid. But in the Atlantic region, a group of First Nations has come up with a possible solution. This is all part of a water research project that APTN's been involved with called Clean Water, Broken Promises. It's led by Concordia University's Institute for Investigative Journalism. APTN's Angel Moore brings us this in collaboration with Global News and the University of King's College.
I can check.
Being a water operator is not a 9-to-5 job. Many are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every day, chlorine levels, filters, and pumps need to be checked in order to ensure safe drinking water. Greg Brewer is the water operator for his community, Tobic First Nation in New Brunswick. He says his team is responsible for about 400 houses.
You know, one of the things that keeps me up at night is we're running on a system here on our water that is over, you know, it's over 30 years old. And what we do is we're adding houses all the time, which we have to accommodate the population.
Brewer is the only certified operator and is always on standby, including holidays. People like him are the last line of defense for clean water, and he makes about $20 an hour. But Brewer says he has bigger problems than salary.
So that's great. The one thing that I see is that the community keeps growing, but the budget's staying the same. It's not reflecting on the growth of the community, which I see as a problem.
An internal presentation from Indigenous Services Canada obtained by our investigation says $9.7 billion is needed over a decade to operate, maintain, and repair infrastructure. And Indigenous Services operations and maintenance policy has not been updated since 1998. First Nations use funding provided under that policy to pay operators' wages. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller announced last December additional funding for over $1.5 billion for safe drinking water.
That includes accompanying communities in the long term for their water needs, the training and operation of local community members that are highly qualified, highly skilled.
Concordia's University Institute of Investigative Journalism and other media outlets surveyed 122 First Nations and found 2/3 of First Nations water operators earn less than the median wage of other operators in their province. Rhonda Knockwood, Director of Operations for Sipekne'katik First Nation in Nova Scotia, says keeping qualified staff is a challenge.
I know that our operator has been approached many times by different municipalities in Halifax Water to go work, and he would be making at least a 50% wage increase with his level 2 certification. That's a concern, and we have to make sure that we find ways to keep our staff satisfied and continue working in our community.
Sipekne'katik First Nation is a growing community with over 1,200 people. Chief Sack says sometimes the water operations and maintenance costs are paid with their own revenue sources, which are in short supply, which leads to difficult choices for Chief Mike Sack.
That money that should be going to the people for their needs, we need to put it into our O&M, our housing, our, all of our departments, just to ensure that there's enough to run those departments with capacity. And even then, we're still, paying our main water operator not enough money. So it's hard for us to keep, good staff around, and we're grateful that they are here.
Halifax water operator Cara Baisley says she would not want to do her job for less than she makes now. The water plant serves more than 100,000 people.
So for my position as a level 4 operator at a level 4 facility for drinking supply of half of Halifax, no, I would not want to work at minimum wage. There is a lot of pressure, a lot of expectation.
Since 2015, Indigenous Services has committed more than $1 billion to address the water crisis. But in our survey, First Nations water operators reported there is not enough money for operations and maintenance. In 2020, Atlantic First Nations Water Authority, an Indigenous-led initiative, developed their own water management model. The Water Authority is developing a long-term approach. Carl Yates is the interim CEO.
So we want to take it from that kind of reactive approach of getting funding, year to year, to let's start looking at least, 25 years out to say, what do we need for a sustainable approach? So a framework for that is what we're really focused on.
The Water Authority, or AFNWA, expects it will receive more funding than what communities have received on their own. So far, AFNWA has 13 member communities. As a member of AFNWA, Tobic First Nation is aiming to manage their own water.
Let's give our own people a try to run things. Because we know best. I mean, that's how I see it anyways. For me personally, I feel like I know what goes on here better than anybody.
The AFN-WA is expected to be operational by 2020, and the model could be adapted to other regions. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Thanks, Angel. It's time for a break, but still ahead, how billions of federal dollars hasn't solved the clean water problem on many First Nations.
You hate to see your relatives, your children, your future living in this condition, and there seems to be no end. It's one problem after another.
Welcome back. Nearly $2 billion has been spent recently on First Nations water systems, yet water woes continue. Sources say backwards policies and the government's failure to keep track of contractors working on neglected water systems is only partly to blame. Here's another story in our Clean Water Broken Promises series, this one by APTN's Brittany Hobson, as part of the water consortium that we told you about earlier.
26 years and counting. That's how long Niskandaga First Nation has been on a boil water advisory, the longest in the country. That was supposed to change when the federal government announced in 2015 the OG Creek community in northwestern Ontario would be getting a new water treatment plant. But what followed was years of construction delays, evacuations, and broken government promises.
You hate to see your relatives, your children, your future living in this condition, and there seems to be no end. It's one problem after another.
During this time, residents have been evacuated twice due to problems with their water supply. So far, the federal government has spent $16.4 million on this one project. But Chief Chris Munoz says residents still can't drink the water.
I seen a 3-year-old this spring, while everything was still while there was snow on the ground, the lake was frozen, dragging a sleigh to get reverse osmosis water. That's heartbreaking.
When Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, he promised to eliminate all long-term boil water advisories by 2021. The government has invested in hundreds of projects across the country in order to keep that promise. But some communities allege they are dealing with shoddy work, adversarial relationships with contractors and engineering firms, and a government approach they say prevents them from hiring companies they trust.
We are forced to pick the lowest bidders, and then there's cost overruns that we are forced to sign. That a lot of, and just keep going up and up, going higher and higher.
In 2017, Kingdom Construction Limited was hired to complete upgrades on Nishkandaga's water treatment plant. Kingdom was never able to complete the job because Niskandaga asked them to leave the community in 2019 after ongoing delays. The chief has been tight-lipped about the reasons for the termination, but Munoz has said the government needs to rethink the lowest bid policy.
We've always maintained our opposition to that practice.
Experts say the federal government's procurement policies for First Nations infrastructure projects puts communities and its residents at risk. Jessica Vandenberg is a T'enneh engineer and consultant who works with Indigenous communities. She says often the government will only factor in total dollar amounts for projects.
There's always issues with the bidding system, and that relates to, rather than putting quality management first, its lowest cost. And again, for rural communities, the lowest cost may not come from a company that has the trust of the community, nor necessarily puts the community's needs first.
NDP MP Charlie Angus has heard from First Nations frustrated with government policies. Indigenous Services Canada does not track issues with engineering and construction companies.
When the project fails, the feds walk away, at least they've got themselves a press release saying that the new plant has been built. Meanwhile, water is still failing to come through. If they were doing those investigations, if they were keeping track, we wouldn't end up with these debacles like Neskantagas.
In an online story published in December, APTN and its partners spoke with 4 other First Nations who reported similar problems with Kingdom, including allegations of excessive overcharges, deficient work, and delays, while another community said they had no complaints with Kingdom. At the time, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller wouldn't comment on specific companies, but said the crisis in Neskantaga is an acute example of issues with third-party contractors. Neskantaga leadership has demanded an investigation into the business practices of the contractors and engineering firms who have worked on its system.
These are investigations that we are willing to support, notably through the initiative of Chief Chris Munias in Neskantaga, to ensure that where we identify mistakes or sharp practices or shoddy work, that doesn't reproduce and cascade from community to community.
In a follow-up interview last month, Miller said he had no knowledge of the low bid policy.
These are decisions that are taken with the community, and we respect those decision-making processes. We do our best not to force any particular community into a particular path.
First Nations leaders maintain this is not always the case. In 2018, Peguis First Nation needed upgrades to their water treatment plant. Chief Glenn Hudson says Peguis was forced to go with Kingdom, who was the lowest bidder, despite preferring a local company.
So we've been dictated to here by government, and they're not being held accountable when it comes down to the project going off the tracks. Mm-hmm. They're saying, well, it's you guys' money, it's your project, but they're the ones that steered us in this direction.
Hudson claims Indigenous Services Canada threatened to pull the funding in the amount of almost $12 million if they refused to work with the lowest bidder. He estimates the difference between the 2 bids was about $180,000. A spokesperson from ISK would not confirm if this was the case, instead saying, quote, "The Peguis First Nation water treatment plant and sewage lagoon upgrades project was awarded to the lowest qualified bidder, Kingdom Construction. All bidders, including Kingdom Construction, met all necessary criteria."
Kind of puts us between a rock and a hard place.
The community asked the company to leave last year due to delays and a communication breakdown. Issues with Kingdom were documented early on. Indigenous Services Canada told the consortium they were aware of issues with Kingdom in other communities prior to its work in Neskantaga, but would not comment on why they kept greenlighting projects for the company. In 2010, the company was hired to build a water treatment plant in Wissahickon First Nation. Ryan Tababadung, Director of Public Works for the nation, said the community was forced to go with Kingdom.
We were basically in the position where if we didn't go with the low bid, then Wissahickon would be responsible for the additional cost between the 2 bids. And as a small First Nation, we didn't have own source revenue, a significant amount of own source revenue.
Tababadung says they had concerns after speaking with others who used Kingdom, had expressed difficulties working with the company.
It's challenging to be in that situation, knowing that we could encounter difficulties, and ultimately we did, that it could have been avoided.
Even though work was eventually completed in 2012, it came in late and over budget, according to Tababadung. All allegations outlined were put to Kingdom President Gerald Landry, who strongly denied the company provided work that didn't meet standards, including in Neskantaga. Our work is conducted with the utmost care according to what has been prescribed in our contracts, which are based on engineers' designs, plans, and specifications. Adding, "We never walk away from our obligations. We perform the work as outlined in our contract." The full response from Landry can be found on aptnnews.ca. Experts believe this issue is not just limited to one company. Angus says unless the federal government makes changes, history will continue to repeat itself.
Until they're willing to put those fundamental mechanisms, I mean, this is, again, simple procedures, simple standards, simple oversight, and accountability mechanisms, we're going to see more failures, and we're also going to see hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on projects that don't end up working.
In the same interview last month, Miller said he would consider updating the government's strategy on tracking complaints against third-party contractors.
As possible, and if it's helpful in ensuring that that people aren't the subject of sharp practices, I'm glad to do that.
Leaders and experts continue to say that unless the government takes a look at its top-down policies and colonial roots, then little will change. And in the end, the most vulnerable will pay the price.
Access to water is a basic human right, and they're not getting that. And so it's a huge detriment to human health, and not just like it's to kids, it's to elders, it's to people, everyday people who are not getting access to clean drinking water.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
We'll have stories from this investigative series, Clean Water, Broken Promises, throughout the week. You can visit aptnnews.ca for more as well. Well, it's time for another break, but still ahead, the $1 million winner of the Arctic Inspiration Prize. Stay with us. Welcome back. It is time now for our photo of the day. This looks like young Leah Pashagamskam had a fun day on the lake with her aunt catching some fish near Nemaska, Quebec. Kind of gives new meaning to the phrase frozen foods. Look at that smile, hey? Keep those photos coming by sending your photos to share@aptn.ca, and you just might see your photo be our next photo of the day. Well, it's time now for us to go to the north. The Iqaluit Music Society has a million new reasons to smile. The group is the 2021 winner of the $1 million Arctic Inspiration Prize.
Absolutely my honor to tell you that you have won the $1 million Arctic Inspiration Prize. Darlene, congratulations so much.
AIP Awards provide startup funding to northern teams with innovative project ideas that will benefit their communities. This year's prize will be used to start an after-school music program for young children. The project will also provide employment for young aspiring musicians to run the program in their communities.
I think it's pretty awesome how this team gets to grow more throughout the years, and just watching them grow as I was participating, it was awesome, and I'm very happy to be a part of the Iqaluit Music Society as well.
There were also 4 $500,000 prizes awarded to projects on food sovereignty, hearing care, and ethical knowledge sharing. Congratulations to all those winners. Well, that is your news to kick off the week. We will have more from the water investigation we're involved with through the Institute for Investigative Journalism. That's coming up in the coming days. And as mentioned, you can find some of that work already on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.